The Dream House by Craig Higginson. Online lesson number 3. This lesson should take you no more than 1 hour to complete. In order to consolidate what you learned in the previous lesson, I'd like you to read the information on pages 46 to 49 in your English Experience study guide. Once you've done that, answer the 8 questions on pages 49 to 52. If you don't have your copy of the study guide with you, I have placed the questions on the slides that follow. Pause the video while you read through the relevant pages. Here are the first 2 questions. Pause the video as you jot down your answers in your study guide. Remember that the mark allocation is a guide as to the suggested length of the answers. Question 1 refers to the influence of the setting as a force that shapes the plot development. Question 2 asks you to consider the complex relationship between the madam of the farm, Patricia, and her long-time employee, Beauty. Naturally, you will refer to the uniquely South African nature of this relationship. Question 3 hints at one of the secrets that are kept by all the inhabitants of Dwaleni. We have already looked at the significance of Beauty's tea drinking ritual in lesson 2. Question 5 requires you to start your character notes on Richard, while question 6 alludes to the predatory sexual nature of Richard. The reference to the symbols and rituals of Christianity in question 7 should alert you to look out for more of these throughout the novel. The final question hints at the unsatisfactory nature of the relationship between Patricia and her lover, John. Actually, I wonder if lover is the correct way to describe John. What do you think? Complete all your answers before moving on to the next slide. I don't know about you, but when I think about a KwaZulu-Natal dairy farm, I have this sort of image in mind. Beautiful, lush green fields, a lovely large home in an idyllic setting. And by the way, if you are from the Midlands area, you might recognize some of these pictures. I scavenged them from Mr. Google. Many of the farms in this area have been sold to developers, usually for the building of townhouse complexes, retirement villages, and other so-called gated communities. All of these photographs show new developments in the KZN Midlands area. I wonder if any of you recognize any of them. Here is a model answer to question 1. Dwaleni is not utopia. Its name refers to a rock, which obviously has numerous symbolic connotations, and you need to explore that as we read on. The farm has been sold to land developers. The chaos on the land reflects Patricia's attitude to her home. It is important to recognize the undertones between Patricia and Beauty. There is evidence of some dissatisfaction from Beauty towards her circumstances, entangled as she is in the Wileys' life. And Beauty's occasional passive-aggressive resistance should raise a knowing smile from all of us who are familiar with this typically South African relationship. For a woman like Patricia, to know so little about Beauty, a woman she has seen almost every day of her adult life, is unforgivable. It smacks of an entrenched colonial and, frankly, racist attitude on the part of the madam of the house. Craig Higginson's portrayal of this relationship is bleak. He holds a mirror up to our society, and we shouldn't like what we see. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the South African cartoon series, Madam and Eve. The social commentary in these cartoons is very similar to Higginson's in The Dream House. It's just done in a gentler manner. We don't feel as uncomfortable when reading Madam and Eve. The title of this particular collection gives us food for thought. In the post-apartheid setting of the novel, how free is beauty and the thousands and thousands of black women like her? The references to dead children is a means of building tension. Clearly, there are many secrets on this farm. We looked at the tea drinking ritual in the last lesson. This is another way of looking at it. Do you remember the point of view information from lesson 1? We're getting to know Richard Wiley through the eyes of other characters. And from what we read, it's obvious that he is a horrible man. The lewd references to Richard not being able to keep his trousers zipped hints at a wanton past. This is not an ideal marriage, as both partners have betrayed their marriage vows, quite openly it seems. Patricia's affair is different though. We believe she has had only one long-term lover, while Richard has a reputation as something of a ladies' man, a serial philanderer. We wonder why John and Patricia have been together for so long. John seems very reserved, and he obviously idolizes his late wife. John gives Patricia a letter, a rather impersonal way of the inevitable ending of their affair. It seems as though Patricia's life's dreams have never materialized. Please pause the video now and read pages 22 to 26 of the novel, Beauty's Point of View. As we get to know Beauty, our sympathy for her develops. She has lived the hard life of a farm worker. She has no children of her own. Her Zulu name actually means the barren one, and has had to devote her life to the demands and whims of her employers. There's a sense of unfulfilled potential with Beauty. She loves fellow farm worker Becky, but has never had her feelings returned. She owns little and does not have a house to call her own. Here is another character with her own desires for a dream house. A critic has written that Becky is an underdeveloped character in the novel. He's always on the fringes of the action, there but not quite. He has suffered hardship and has to be the single parent to his young son Bongani. A telling detail is that Bongani has blue eyes and a wisp of white hair. You should underline key quotes from this section and find images that stand out to you. For me, the image of the painting of an English countryside scene is significant. So many English-speaking South Africans have a British heritage. The glass on this picture is cracked, as was the mirror in the first section of the novel. What do you make of the symbolism of the cracked glass? Take note of the wisdom that is evident in much of the conversation between Beauty and Patricia. Beauty is observant. She knows Patricia and Richard better, I think, than they know themselves. Turn now, please, to page 27 of the novel. In the next slide, Dr. Zwichers will continue with her reading of the novel.
Patricia, page 27 to 32. What are you planning to do with that spade? I'm going for a walk. Well, then Becky must come. What for? I'm not a bloody child. Richard has been angling to dig her up, even before the earth movers arrived. Her grave is marked by a simple stone with only her name, Rachel, and a single date marked on it, the date of her birth and her death. I buried her at the other end of the stables, at the edge of the bloodwood grove behind the hay barn. Often Patricia still asks Becky to take her there. He drives as carefully as he can over the fields, every clump of the grass jolting her ragged nerves. Then he takes out the walker and she picks her way over to the quiet shade of the trees. She stands there in the cool, iron grey light, everything hushed, as in a cathedral. The fine, dry fronds hissing, even with the slightest suggestion of wind. Her heart swells with the sound of those trees. But there is never any sign of Rachel, just the stone and the breeze, and the great vacant space stretching across the valley as far as the immovable smoky wall of the Drakensberg. She might have built the farmhouse on that exact spot, had the house not already existed. It was the highest point of the farm, which consisted of a long valley with a swelling of hill at the heart of it. The hill on which the house, the bloodwoods and the farm buildings stood clustered, like wet animals that have crawled onto an island to escape a flood. Each structure was angled in such a way as to suggest they might slip off back into the dismal current, never to be seen or heard of again. Instead, they have been confined to the first house. Ah, yeah, one of the first European houses to be built in the area. It was made of local stone, had a long veranda along the front and the usual corrugated iron roof. It was covered in lichen, surrounded by a bottle green moss, and its roots went deep into the earth. Since Patricia had first known the house, it had never had so much as a crack in it. But inside, it had always been as dark and dank as any cave. There's nothing out there, just a dirt road with nothing at the end of it. Who would live to Hellengone like this? Us. Richard stares hard at her, trying to locate the source of his wife's apparent mirth. We're going to see tomorrow. We went there once, on your motorbike, while you were still the manager. Do you remember that? He took her all the way down to Sheffield Beach and buried her in the sand, up to her neck, and he kissed her. There was sand in her mouth, in both of their mouths, from laughing. They stayed up all night and he lit a fire on the beach and they talked about their lives. His in the north of Yorkshire, growing up with his father, who was a farm manager like him, because his mother had died of a brain tumor when he was 3. Hers in Durban, with a bedroom view of the harbour, and a father at the centre of her life. Her mother also died young, in a car accident while drunk. And so the two of them found a commonality in this. because there was no other. Shortly, before the sun came up, they made love. By then there were no more words to say to one another, and making love was about all that was left. She often thinks of the swim they had afterwards. The sun filtering through the cloud above the sea, water warm and made of pearly grey light. Just the sea and their naked bodies, their kisses slippery with salt water, and the pale green haze of the hills beyond the shore, the fields of sugarcane in the mist. There hadn't been a soul to disturb their peace. It was paradise. Richard was paradise, and they have never spoken in quite the same way since. That was another man, he says. Not me. Too bloody right. Beauty makes her usual appearance and sets the overloaded, buckling tea tray down. Before they sold off the remaining ponies, this was the time of day when Patricia would have had them brought in from the fields, and they would have been paraded up and down the lawn so she could examine them. Often they would be released so they could trot about, buck and fart. She would issue instructions, occasionally asking that a horse be brought over. She would step down, using the animal to support herself, a hand running along the silky neck, her fingers touching the velvety, snorting muzzle. Sometimes she would inspect a tooth or finger a pastern or a hock. But now there were no more animals. Only one dairy cow for milk, which would be going to beg his wife's people at Singatop. And some of Richard's chickens, those that had escaped and managed since to survive the civets and the compound dogs. Though there was also the stray donkey that one of the workers had taken in. But when he left the farm, he also left it. Now it roamed freely, feeding off the lush grass and lingering around the rubble where the workers' compound had once stood. Oh, perhaps still hoping for its owner's return. At the arrival of the tea, Richard sits on a plum-coloured step and proceeds to put on his boots. He has owned the same pair for a decade now. Patricia and Beauty have often laughed about them, saying that it's only a matter of time before they sprouted feelers and walked off. Every morning, before he wakes up, Beauty polishes Richard's boots at the kitchen table and places them outside his bedroom door. Whenever the sole becomes worn through or the stitching goes rotten and rips, she gets Becky or one of the grooms to patch it up. Patricia doubts there's much of the original boot left. The laces alone must have been replaced half a dozen times. But Richard loves them. And there are few objects these days he remembers. His feet still slide into them without effort, a perfect fit. Even today, Richard's way of telling her he is going out is simply to put on his boots. Where are you going? Apparently, he decides not to answer. His fingers have become tangled in the laces while trying to make what her father used to call a butterfly knot. Beauty, I would like Becky to be with Richard. Yebo, Mrs. Do you know where he is? Yebo, Mrs. I have seen him. I will get him now. Beauty circumvents the sleeping Rottweiler and disappears back into the house. Hadidas call from a lightning-blasted tree. Richard curses and starts the knot again. Not receiving any help from her, and certainly not expecting it. A fresh wave of mist has come in from the mountains and is threading through the trees. In spite of the wetness, Patricia is hoping for a decent-sized storm on her last night. It's unlikely, given the dullness of everything. But she loves nothing more than the rumble of thunder, which always seems to threaten the very foundation of the house. The lightning in these parts is much feared. It has killed several horses and cattle on the farm, and when Patricia was a girl, one of the workers. 2 years ago, it also killed 2 schoolboys from John Ford's old school, which made the national news and filled the local papers for a week. The boys had been out on a rugby field, playing golf in the sunlight, when the lightning arrived literally out of the blue. The cloud came only a moment afterwards, shutting out the sun and bringing a torrent of rain. The 2 dead bodies lie quite still, their hands almost touching as the other boys ran for shelter. A lightning had once struck the farmhouse, a direct hit. Patricia was sitting in the lounge with her chihuahuas, watching television, when there was an almighty crack that seemed to split the house in 2. A ball of blue flame danced across the room, and for several hours afterwards there were popping sounds coming from inside the roof. The line of wires threading through the rooms were marked by a thick line of charcoal, and the electrician who came later said the blast should have burned down the house. Since then, the wiring in their house has never been quite the same. Light bulbs frequently explode, and sometimes the electricity will surge and cut out. Rain is not a thing they need very often at Dwaleni. The place is a bog in many places for much of the year, and there are 5 dams that are fed by reliable springs. They once tried planting wheat, but the meager crop was ruined by fungus. The hooves of the ponies were often infected with canker or thrush. The farmhouse itself has always had an air of damp, with the sheets permanently musty and the wooden floorboards wet. The lining of the curtains was stained long ago by a peppering of black mold that has never since come out in the wash. She has never been one for tidying up. Most rooms there are cobwebs in the corners of the ceilings, and visitors, in the days they still had visitors, complained of fleas and airlessness, as several of the windows had been warped shut. Except for the occasional lick of paint, which is presently falling back into the garden in uneven plate-sized chunks. She has kept the house exactly as her father left it. She has said before that if the house gave Richard bronchitis now and again, that was his problem. He had always been welcome to renovate the place himself. I think you should take off your boots and go inside for a bath. So they are lucky if they can get him into the bath once a week. But if he stinks, Patricia doesn't know about it. It has been her technique, perfected over the years, to survive a husband by noticing him as rarely as possible. Outside there's a bloody fog. Mist. Will you never learn? Richard stands again, threatening for a moment to lunge back indoors. But then he picks up the spade, turns and limps across the garden towards the stables, his boots still under his arm. He has that furtive, loping glee of a baboon stealing mealies. Had there been a gun at hand, she might have taken a shot at him. Richard! Beauty! Beauty! But Beauty has also vanished.
Some of the secrets of Dwaleni are starting to rise to the surface as we listen to the various characters. We learn of Rachel, who must be the dead infant child of the Wileys. There is such pathos in the image of an elderly, demented Richard looking for the grave of his dead daughter. What anguish is in his brain that he can no longer control as the senility takes hold of him. Dwaleni is described as an increasingly dilapidated and run-down farm. This is not a place of joyful family memories. It is stuck, it seems, in an awful past. It's not a dream house. I'm sure that none of us envy the Wileys their marriage, their relationship. The paradise that Patricia expected from Richard and their marriage never materialized. Take time to look up any words that you don't know. Many of us are not familiar with the landscape and activities of dairy farms in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands. There might be many words on this slide, for example, that you're not familiar with. Continue to think about these 3 points, which were included in Lesson 2. Add to your own notes as your understanding of the novel develops. Make sure that you spend time on consolidating the information from this section of the novel. I made this video lesson on the evening that President Ramaphosa announced a slight easing of lockdown regulations. So cigarettes are fine, but school lessons aren't. This means that there will still be a number of these online classes. So until next time, stay safe, everybody.